So as you guys can see, my Johnson 25 runs great, but it's not pumping water. No water out of the telltale and no water out of the back. This is a problem because the water is obviously the coolant for the motor. Without it, your motor will seize up or blow a head gasket or crack the head or block or whatever, probably within 4 or 5 minutes. So you got to make sure that you're pumping water at any given time. This is part of routine maintenance on any outboard motor. It's not very hard. Any relatively handy person can do it, and your first time will take you about an hour. Once you get good at it, about half an hour or so. So we're going to go through the process right now. I'll show you guys a couple pitfalls on this Johnson 25, and so let's get started. First thing we're going to do is get the motor out of the water. I'm going to flip it around and tilt it up. Having the motor tilted up like this makes it a little bit easier to work on, and so that's why I generally do it. Our next step is going to be taking out the lower unit mount bolts. We got 1, 2 over here, 3, 4 on the other side, and then that should be loose. And looks like we have one up here too. That slides through this 6-inch extension here to make it a long shaft. So we're going to get all those out, and then after that we're going to go after the shift shaft. Okay, all 4 bolts out, and the nut that was up here, you can see that we can separate the lower unit from the leg by about 1 inch, but the shift shaft is still attached. So we got to detach it. Let's go around the other side of the motor. In some motors there's a little coupling in here that you can sneak a screwdriver in and detach it. Other ones you have to detach it up at the head. On this Johnson there's this little access port here. I'm going to get that off with the 2 screws and I'll show you the coupling. So right in there, looks like it's maybe a 7/16 little bolt in there that's holding these 2 shafts together. One that comes up from the linkage, the shift linkage up top, and one that goes down to the lower unit. Just detach one of them and just loosen it up so that the shaft can slide out. Don't remove the bolt completely because you don't want to get it lost in this housing here. So I'm just going to loosen it up and then give this thing a yank. It comes right off. Alright, so we're off now. You can see this was the one mounting bolt that went up front. Here's the shift shaft, and that's the drive shaft that goes all the way up. Looking at what we got right here, it's already looking pretty gnarly. Looks as though this got pretty hot at one point because it's all bubbly and stuff and melted. This here is the gasket that seals the water pump to the impeller housing. That's pretty well destroyed. Part of this housing right here is all eaten away, so it's no wonder that this thing wasn't pumping. Fortunately for me, I bought the whole kit. Sometimes I only buy the impeller just to save a little money, but I got a good deal on this kit. It was only 15 bucks on eBay for the whole shebang. So we're gonna take this off. We got 3/8 bolts right here, 4 of them. Start by taking that off, and then we're gonna slide the housing up. So we can see here that the old impeller is just absolutely demolished. No fins left on it at all. This can actually be a pain in the ass sometimes because it means that all these little bits of rubber have been pushed through the coolant system of the motor. So sometimes when you see this, it means you got to take off your water jacket and flush it out and stuff like that, and you get little pieces of rubber which occlude the coolant passageways. So that'll be another problem that I'll have to deal with once I get the new one on and see how it pumps. If it pumps through, then I lucked out. You can see in here, this is all just gunked up, disgusting. Yeah. So it's fortunate that I have the full package, like I said, so I can replace all that stuff. You don't have to wait until you get your impeller in this condition in order to change it. This is a preventative maintenance part, and your water pump will stop pumping long before you get to this point. This one was probably ran dry by a previous owner that is ran out of the water without lubrication on it, and that's what happened. However, I probably have one around here. Here you go. This one's still got all its fins, but you see how they're all sort of bent like this? If your fins are not perfectly straight, then your water pump is not really going to pump very well. And that is because these things sit inside here sort of at an angle. So as the impeller rotates around, it compresses the fins and then they straighten out, and it compresses them and then they straighten out as it rotates around here. If they're already all compressed like that, then it's not going to pump. So let's get all this junk out of here. I'm going to take a peek underneath here, see if there's anything blocking that up, and then we're going to start putting the new parts in. Alright, so I got my bottom gasket on and I got the bottom plate on. Next we have the impeller. I will take note on which side it goes down on, because you see there's the little notch that the key goes in, and oftentimes they only go down on one side. You see there's no notch on this side. So this side goes down, the key goes right in there. That's my old key. I should have a new key in here. Yes, I do. I'm going to use two hands for this procedure because it can be a little tricky, but this little key goes into the notch and then you slide the impeller down so that it fits and then locks. Okay, so now we're going to install the impeller pump housing. What I'm going to do is take some grease and grease all around in here so it's nice and lubricated, and that is because on the initial startup the impeller would be touching this dry surface, which would cause premature wear. So we don't want that. We're going to have it all nice and greasy. Any grease will do. Slide all the way down there so that it's just resting on top of the impeller. Now, I'm going to take my vice grips and grip onto the shaft. Doesn't really matter where. You can grip it anywhere except for the splines at the top. You don't want to damage those. But if you put a little kink or a notch or whatever in anywhere in the shaft, it's not going to damage anything. So I'm going to gently push down towards the skeg on the impeller pump housing here. As I rotate this around to the right, that's going to align all of the fins of the impeller so that they fall right into, or allows the impeller housing to slide right onto it. So here we go. There we go. All done. Now the 4 bolts go in. Alright, now all squared away. Some kits are going to come with various little gaskets. There's one right here, sometimes there's one right here or up here at the upper splines. Just take a look at what you got and install them if needed. Alright, now we're putting the lower unit back into the motor. First thing that we're going to do is take some of that same grease and we're going to apply it to the sides of the splines, not to the top. The reason being that if you have a great big glom of grease up here on the top, it could prevent the drive shaft from seating all the way. So we're going to take a look at what we have right here. This is a shaft where the drive shaft goes. It helps send the drive shaft up. Right here, this is the water uptake. Hopefully there's no rubber stuck in there. And the shift shaft goes right up in here. So come at it like this. Goes in there. And this is all sort of a trial and error in getting it the right way until you just sort of wiggle it in. Oftentimes I'll put the motor in gear so that I can rotate the propeller back and forth. That will rotate the drive shaft and sort of wiggle it into its mating surface at the bottom of the motor. So I'm going to fool around with this a little bit more until I get it all the way in. Remember that you want to have it installed completely by hand. You don't want to force it in by tightening down the mounting bolts. I've had motors where someone actually had the drive shaft misaligned and they sent the drive shaft through the bottom of the motor and just fucked the whole thing up. So yeah, you want to put it all the way in by hand, then bolt it up. So that's what I'm going to do. Once you have everything all back together, do a little test to make sure that the shift shaft is aligned properly. So here you see we're in neutral, our shift lever is in neutral, we're in gear, now we're in gear, back to neutral, and out of the other gear. Okay, so we're going to close this up and we're ready for a test run. So as you can see, we're pumping great, pushing water all the way through it. This motor is ready to run for another 35 years. As you can see, guys, there wasn't very much to it, pretty easy. You should consider doing this at least every other year on your motors as part of preventive maintenance. I do it every spring on mine. Never had a problem out on the water overheating my motor. If y'all have any questions about this process, let me know.